Today I'm going to show you what are the best tools for writing fiction using AI. This is now the third time I have done this video, and not just because I felt like it, but because there have really been a lot of major changes in AI over the past couple of months, and it was just time to remake this video, and I will probably remake it again before the year is up. But this time I actually do have an answer of what I believe to be the best option. And so stick around to the end for my verdict on what is the best scenario, in my humble opinion, if you write fiction using AI. Now, I want to once again reiterate that there's a difference between AI tools and AI models. I mentioned this in a past video, but I'll mention it again. An AI tool makes use of multiple models to create its output. However, you can also use each of those models individually. Most of them are accessible in other ways, and each has their own pros and cons. For instance, Claude 2.0 is a model, and it is very different from GPT-4, which is another model. You also have open source models like Mistral, which have their own pros and cons. And so there are tools out there that will basically allow you to interact with one or more of those models. And then there are other tools which use all of them and use them in a tailored way, in this case, specifically for fiction authors. And so I'm going to start by looking at some of the model interfaces first, and then talk about some of the tools second. The first and most well-known is ChatGPT, right? This is a standard chatbot, which is very powerful. One of the great advantages of ChatGPT is that it is multimodal, which means you can generate images with it. It can analyze images. It can analyze audio and transcribe audio. It can do a whole lot of things. As a tool for writing fiction, however, it is not optimized for that. And so you have to really get good at your prompts in order to do it. Plus, most authors have found that the two models that ChatGPT uses, GPT 3.5 and GPT-4, are not the best at producing realistic sounding prose. That said, ChatGPT can be a valuable resource for other things besides actually generating prose. So it can be useful for brainstorming, for coming up for ideas for your book, for coming up with world building or character information, all of that sort of background stuff that you need as an author. In addition, since you can use DALL-E 3, you are able to create images with ChatGPT, which allows you to create maybe concept art for your characters and different things like that. And so it can be really useful in that regard. However, as a structured tool to actually generate a book, it is not the most efficient. Similar, but slightly better, in my personal opinion, is Claude. Claude is currently only available in a number of countries, but not all countries. Notably, Canada doesn't have it right now. But I'll show you another tool that will allow you to get around that. But basically, this functions very similarly to ChatGPT. As of right now, when I'm recording this in January of 2024, it is not multimodal, so it will not analyze images or generate images or anything like that, but it works very similarly. And the reason I like it more than ChatGPT is because it is so much better for natural sounding language. With a caveat. Like ChatGPT, there are multiple models within the chat window here. For instance, you have Claude 2.1, Claude 2.0, and Claude Instant, which is an older model. And Claude 2.0 seems to be the best one for natural sounding prose. Claude 2.1, while it got better at a lot of things, it got worse for actual writing. And so thankfully, we still have access to Claude 2.0 inside of the chatbot, and so you can use that here, or you can use something else. But as a chatbot, it functions very similarly to ChatGPT. There are a few quirks. For instance, you may have heard me, if you've been watching this channel for a while, talk about the super prompt, which is basically a massive prompt giving the AI all of the data it needs to write an entire chapter in one go. And Claude 2.0 seems to be the only model that does this somewhat efficiently. And in fact, what you're seeing here on the left here is an example of a single prompt output that covered an entire chapter. Now let's say you don't have access to Claude, or you would rather have a tool that sort of gives you the best of all worlds where you can access multiple things at once. And I'm going to give you a few options for that. The first option is Poe. Poe, which you can get at poe.com, is a service that basically takes multiple models into it and allows you to chat with any one of the models that you choose. The price is the same as both ChatGPT and Claude Pro, which is $20 a month. And you can basically say, start a new chat, and you can pick from a variety of different models. They have Mistral here, they have Llama, they have the ChatGPT models, they have the Claude models, the same ones we saw. And you can access quite a number of models here, Google's Palm, and all for a single $20 a month price. You can even access DALL-E 3, which is actually pretty cool. The downside to this is that the access that you have to these is a little bit limited compared to if you were using ChatGPT or Claude directly, which gives you a little more access. But Poe can be a really good option for those who just want to dabble and don't want to have a pay-as-you-go model. You just want a flat fee that gives you access to all of the different models, or at least all of the major ones here. Speaking of all of the different models, there is another one I want to point you to, which is OpenRouter. And OpenRouter works much the same. It is a chat bot. But here in OpenRouter, you can select the model, and there is a massive list of models that you can choose from. Basically, any model that is out there or has ever existed, pretty much all of them, or at least all of the ones that matter, are in OpenRouter. You can select one of them, and then you can chat with one or more. You can actually chat with multiple models at the same time. The difference between this and a service like Poe is that you can go to your account and you top it off with money, and it becomes a credit system. So let's say you give it $10. You will then pay as you go with each of these different models. The good news is that some of the open source models are extremely cheap. Some of them are even free. And so you can use those to your heart's content, and it will barely use any of the money that you give it. If you're using a beefier model like Claude 2 or ChatGPT 4, any of those will use up your money a little bit faster. But honestly, it's not that big of a deal, and you are unlikely to spend more than $20 in a month unless you're really pushing the AI really hard. So those are 4 examples of different chatbots that interact with the models in different ways. However, none of these, as you may have noticed, are particularly tailored for fiction, and that's really what I wanted to talk to today. The first one I'm going to cover is PseudoRight. PseudoRight I'm going to talk about first because it has been around the longest and has a larger community and is likely to be around for a while. The way PseudoRight works is if you are working on a manuscript, let's say you've already written it, you can come here and there are various like rewrite, describe, expand, different things with AI that allow you to improve upon the text that you have. If you want to generate a full chapter, the way that works is you use something that used to be called Story Engine. Now it's just sort of natively integrated into PseudoRight as a whole, where you come down to brain dump and you just dump everything you know about the story you want to write. And then you also add what genre you're going to be writing in and information about your style. And then you can just come here and say, generate a synopsis, which will generate a synopsis like it sounds. You can then generate characters based on what it gives you. Chances are the characters that it gives you will not be perfect and you'll want to fix them up a little bit. Same with pretty much every step along here. You want to validate it as you go to make sure it's good, to make sure the synopsis is correct and that it's the story you want to tell, to make sure the characters are all good. And then you have an outline, which you can also generate based on everything you've generated so far, and then validate it, add it yourself, or you can write your own stuff and just copy and paste it in there. And then you get down here to the bottom and say, create chapter 1, or you can come up here to the top where you have these beats for chapter 1, and you hit generate here and it will generate the entire chapter. Now, this is a good program and it has got a very simple, straightforward workflow. However, it is no longer the one that I recommend the most. And there is a certain demographic that it'll work well for, primarily those who are a little bit more technically challenged and don't want something as complicated. PseudoRight is really good for that audience because it is simple. It is the simplest and probably the easiest way to get started writing with AI. But the reason I don't recommend it so much anymore is because this process of generating entire chapters tends to be really inaccurate unless you really know what you're doing. and it takes a lot of work to even get there, and it's often not that good. The same goes for any of these like rewrite options. Like you can rewrite it to show more than tell, or to expand it or shorten it. But 9 times out of 10, I have found that what it gives me isn't honestly that great, and I find myself rewriting the stuff myself anyway. However, there is a place for it. It is one of the staples of fiction writing with AI. It's been around the longest, and it does have a few redeeming qualities. For instance, these plugins. If we go to this plugin store that they have, you are able to view a whole bunch of these. Basically, these are custom prompts that the community has developed, and PseudoRight, to its credit, has a thriving community and is really, really good. All of these things can help you get even better options to use within your writing. And if anything basically saves PseudoRight in my mind, it's these plugins, because these are, you can find some really good ones in here if you know what you're doing and are willing to take a look at all of the plugins that they have here. But that said, I think it needs a little work, and I hope the developers, I know the developers, and they're going to be putting in a lot of work into this. I know they can make it better and that they're working on it. But the last thing that I don't particularly like about it is the price. And the price is a flat rate. The standard one that I think most people go for is the $30 tier. So it's $30 a month. And for that, you get a number of credits. And those credits get used up as you use up your words, as you generate words. How much it uses up really depends on what model you're using. So if we go back to our novel here, if we select this, first of all, if we select like rewrite, for example, we can't actually choose what model it is using to rewrite, which is an issue in my mind. But if you're writing the entire chapter, you do actually have access to a number of different models to do it with, including a number of open source models. But as you can see here, it's a very limited number, especially when you compare it to something like OpenRouter, which has, you know, how many dozens of different models here to choose from. So it's not really good on customization, if you know what I mean. And all of those models use the credit system at a different rate. The open source models use fewer credits. The larger models like GPT-4 and Claude 2 use more credits. It just depends on how you want to do it. The problem is once you're out, and you have to spend even more money to refill. And so it's kind of a pay-as-you-go system, because you're using up credits as you go, but it's also a subscription where you pay, you know, the $30 or $60 a month to get your words. And so while that's good, it's actually better than it used to be, because it used to be that they just give you 90,000 words at the $29 tier, which you could burn through like that. And now it's a little bit better. You're going to get more than 90,000 words unless you're using like GPT-4 all the time for everything. But that, combined with the fact that you can't customize things like what model you're using for rewrite or something like that, makes it a little bit less on the totem pole for me right now. Now, let me show you another one. This one is called Rexy, and this one's a little different and not something that I've talked about too much on this channel. The developers of Rexy, if there was ever a true case of authors creating an AI tool for authors, actual authors, made by authors, for authors, it would be Rexy. Rexy is what is touted as the Adobe Photoshop of AI writing tools. Meaning it is very complex, it is very advanced, but if you can master it, there is like no end to what you can do with it. Now, I haven't dived too deep into it too much, but I've seen enough to know that Future Fiction Academy and the people over there at Future Fiction Academy who have developed Rexy really know what they're doing when it comes to prompting, and have created something very complex, but very, very powerful. It is more expensive than any of the other tools that we're talking about, and that's partly because with Rexy, you're also getting access to the Future Fiction Academy library, which is pretty much daily labs teaching you about AI and other things in the author sphere. And so it's an educational platform as well as a actual writing tool, and it does a very good job, but it is going to be more money. So it's really only for those who are very serious about writing with AI, because not only is it more money, it is also a little bit more complex on how you use it. That said, it is a very powerful tool, one that I recommend to anybody who really wants to dig deep and is not afraid of getting their hands dirty with something very technical. It is a very powerful tool, one that I recommend to anybody who really wants to dig deep and is not afraid of getting their hands dirty with something very technical. and are able to pay for it and would be interested in the community, because Future Fiction Academy also has a very good community of people who are very serious about writing with AI. So that is one to take a look at as well. Which brings me to my last tool on this list, which is a tool called Novel Crafter. Now this is Novel Crafter. We're taking a look at the outlining section here. You can see each of these is information about each chapter in my outline. And then you can go here to the writing section, and this is going to be an overview, so don't expect me to dive too deep into any of the features. But Novel Crafter has become my favorite tool for writing fiction because it became very clear early on as I was working with it and talking to the developer that she really understood the author community and what authors actually need in a tool. And while it is a little bit more advanced and a little bit more of a learning curve than PseudoRight, it's not quite at the learning curve that Rexy has, so it's kind of a perfect in-between space. And there are some things that it does miles and miles better than PseudoRight. For instance, the codex. The codex is where you put information about, we have characters, location, objects, lore. With PseudoRight, the only thing you can do is characters. And one of the things you can do is you'll notice this is a scene beat that I took into Novel Crafter, and then it generated this prose right here. This scene beat, you'll notice some of these are underlined. That's because it's looking at this and saying, oh, Mina. Mina is a character. And then it comes over here and it reads everything about Mina. But if Mina were not in this scene, it would not reference her, which actually saves you money. Because as you are generating this in the prompt, it's going to be referencing all of your information about Mina so the AI knows how to write Mina in the prose here. But if Mina isn't in the scene, then we don't really want to waste the words in the AI, including her in the prompt. Not only will that waste words, but it also might mess up the scene because it might put Mina in the scene when we don't want Mina in the scene. And so that's just one tiny feature that nevertheless makes a big difference when you're writing. Now, you might be wondering about price for this particular tool. And the thing about the price here is that there is a fixed cost. It is a lot less than PseudoRight or Rexy. However, it hooks up to OpenRouter. So you remember OpenRouter that we talked about before, which is a pay-as-you-go model where you give it, say, $10, and then it will slowly use up those $10 as it goes until it runs out and you have to top it off again. Novel Crafter hooks up directly to OpenRouter so that anything it generates in here is charged to OpenRouter. And I say OpenRouter, but it's really OpenRouter and the OpenAI Playground and a lot of other options. But let's just, for simplicity's sake, let's just say OpenRouter right now. So as you are using this tool, you will also be paying as you go. However, the starting price for Novel Crafter is far less than what you would get in PseudoRight. And unless you're really, really pushing it, the chances of you actually exceeding the amount that you pay for PseudoRight is very, very low. So it's a bit of a complex pricing structure, but for a good reason, because you don't want to be paying for for example, an open source model that is almost free or very, very low cost. You don't want to be paying more than you have to. And with this, you do it through OpenRouter. You pay what the OpenRouter rates are, which are very, very low, and you don't pay anything extra on top of that. Add to that the fact that the writing process is very simple. You just say, you do a / command and hit scene beat, then enter in what your beat is, and you go one section at a time from there. And you can edit what it gives you, and then as you write the next scene beat, it will read everything that you just wrote and edited, and it will continue writing, hopefully in a seamless style to that. And depending on which model you're using, it will usually do a good job at sort of understanding your style and writing very similar to it. So you might be asking, all right, so which tool should I actually use? As I've already mentioned, I think there are different reasons why you might want one or another, but as a general rule of thumb, my top recommendation would be to use Novel Crafter. It is by far the most optimized for fiction writing specifically, and once you kind of get to know how it works, it will be very, very simple to actually write a book with AI. However, if you have a little bit more money to spend, I think the optimal way to do this is to use a tool like Novel Crafter, but then also have a chatbot. So you could use ChatGPT, Claude, or Poe. Those would probably, I'd say pick one of those three and use it in conjunction with Novel Crafter, because that'll give you a little bit more flexibility on what you can do. And then Novel Crafter is used specifically for writing fiction, and having a chatbot that says like, oh, well, maybe I don't want to write fiction per se, or I'm just looking for headlines, or it's useful to have a chatbot for as a catch-all for everything else that you might need the AI for. But that's really only if you are comfortable paying for two services. Otherwise, I'd say if you could only have one, I would say pick Novel Crafter. It does a very, very good job. Now, you may want a little bit more of an in-depth dive into why I consider Novel Crafter to be better than PseudoRight. And if that's the case, I have a video right here that you can check out that will give you a basic overview of my comparison between Novel Crafter and PseudoRight. I'll see you in the next video.